just stick around. Ask me a few questions. You might like the answers. Then again, you might not. It's quite possible when you ask someone a question, they might give you an answer that you don't want to hear. So be alert, stay alert, and always maintain alert in your pocket. You can buy your alerts right from my website, matthewdawkins.com. Be alert, don't be a god. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming. As always, these videos have to start off with a bit of random drivel because no one shows up when they first start off. People probably would show up if I scheduled them. Hi, the Vampire Castle Gaming. How are you, you ask? Well, how am I? How am I? I'm doing okay. I've just come out of an hour and a half long meeting, and meetings tend to be a bit of a drain on the energy cells, but I'm doing all right. I'm doing some Monster Kingdoms work in advance of the crowdfunding campaign that we're hoping to launch in the next couple of months. Something separate to the book itself right now. Who knows, it might end up incorporated into it, but I do love writing for Monster Kingdoms. It's so much fun. How are you, Vampire Castle Gaming? You're doing good. Glad to see. Glad to see that you are. And as always, people tuning in live, thank you so much for watching live. These AMAs would not take place without you, and that's fairly obvious, isn't it? Otherwise, it would just be me talking to myself. It wouldn't be an AMA. It would be Hello, Bro Meliad. What dice is your favourite from the D&D set of 7 shapes? The D12. The D12 is my favourite shaped die. I can say that without hesitation, because the D12 rolls and rolls and rolls. It's the perfectly formed, perfectly balanced die for rolling. If you want to lose a die off at the edge of a table, roll a D12. For some reason you'd think that the D20, being slightly rounder due to it having more sides, would roll further and faster, but there's something about the D12 that balances shape with momentum. There, you didn't think you were going to get a serious answer from me there, and it wasn't a serious answer, but I did have an answer. And that's what these AMAs are always about. You ask me a question, I'll spit out whatever bullshit comes to mind, and maybe sometimes it'll sound like I'm informed. Hello, Vampire Castle Gaming. Yep, to you, Link the Vampire. Oh, D&D this time. What's your favourite monster? Mine is the Mind Flayer. I've always been a big fan of Mind Flayers, Illithids, Ulitherids, and the like. Alhoons, which always sounded a bit like a country and western singer to me. Alhoon. But I think there's always a risk with D&D monsters of overexposure. And Baldur's Gate 3, fantastic game. I'm sure a lot of you love it. Of course, very heavily had the Mind Flayer involved. And so I think Mind Flayers need a bit of a break. They are the zombies of horror movies in D&D right now. They're appearing everywhere. A little like Merkel, Bane and Baal, who I've always been a big fan of the Dead 3. Although I find the fact that they're referred to as the Dead 3 as an honorific now, when they're supposed to be quite active, a little pointless. It made sense in 2nd edition when they had been destroyed, but now they should just be called, I don't know, the Triumvirate or the Dark 3. I think that's how they used to be known, wasn't it? The Dark 3. So yeah, anyway, my favourite D&D monster. What's that panther with the back tendrils? The one that is very Hound of Tindalos like, except it's a cat. Dimension Crawler? Why am I drawing a blank there? You see, I've stumbled into my own trap here because I have said this is a D&D, ask me anything, and I know very little about Dungeons and Dragons. Displace a beast, that's what I was looking for, yes. People know quite how to act around Displace a beast. I enjoy them. I like those fronds that they have protruding from their back. So what else do we have here? I'm very glad you like my answer, Bromeliad. Pleasing you is what I live to do. Tom Moore said, if I wanted to play a cool RPG about falling empires, what D&D should I play? You shouldn't play D&D, Tom Moore. You should wait for Monster Kingdom that's coming out in the next couple of months. It'll be on a crowdfunding campaign site somewhere, probably back a kit, I imagine. And it has been my pride and joy to work on. I very much enjoyed working on Monster Kingdoms, and the authors on it have been fantastic. I very much recommend it. It'll be a lot of fun. And it is all about what you have just described, as you well know. Crumbling empires, falling kingdoms, and of course, monsters. But if I were to be accurate and actually answer your question, that's a good question. You know, I offhand can't think. Scarred Lands, I suppose. There's a lot that is in Scarred Lands in the wake of the Titans War. So the gods and the Titans are clashing. And much of the world of Skarn has been absolutely decimated or destroyed, polluted by the war, to the point that there's fossilized remains of gods and Titans that you can basically adventure in. I love that. So that's not falling kingdoms in a societal medieval sense. Monster Kingdoms does that a bit better, I think. But Scarred Lands definitely has it down for divine calamity. Ali says, what do you think about Enes Batur going to Netflix? Is that strategic? I have no idea who that is. Tell me who that person is. This could be someone who I should know, given that this is a D&D AMA. But again, I don't know a lot about D&D, so you can ask me anything. Okay, so I'll give you an answer, Ali. I think it is a serious indictment on the quality of creatives at Netflix, but particularly an indictment of the creatives at Apple TV. Because Ennis could have gone there, but didn't. And we all know what that means. I think you know what that means. So, think on. Dove Sun Seed Sword says Displacer Beast. Everyone says Displacer Beast. Yes, it's a fucking Displacer Beast. Justin Croto says, what are your thoughts on 5th edition versus the previous gentleman? Oddly, 5th edition, as much as I've enjoyed 5th edition from a ease of gaming standpoint. I've played more 5th edition than I've ran, which is unusual for me. You can get straight into it, but it doesn't get its hooks into me in the same way the more granular editions do. I prefer 3.5, specifically Pathfinder, and now Pathfinder 2nd edition now that I've read it. And I prefer 2nd edition AD&D because there was more construction, more minutiae, and I completely understand why some people don't get on with that kind of thing. It's not for everybody. But 5th edition for me is a little too archetype heavy. Not as much as 4th ed, but it still has some of that framework, which again, I think is perfectly fine, works really well for some players, just isn't enough to captivate me. Meliad says, if you were a Lich, where would you hide your phylactery? In a hat, obviously. In the olden days, Liches, for some inexplicable reason, used to always wear their phylacteries on top of their heads in very tall hats that resembled something I guess you could consider quite Jewish in culture, because of course a phylactery is a part of Jewish culture, and the hats resembled those worn by in especially Orthodox Jewish circles in a lot of old Lich art. You know, they'd have very tall hats. Those of you who are unfamiliar may be familiar with the musical Jesus Christ Superstar, where the Pharisees wear very tall hats like that. I'm sure they have proper names that I'm unaware of. Now, being old school, being a big OSR gamer like I am, I would insist on wearing a phylactery as a hat. Except, actually, you know what? Double bluff. I would keep my phylactery in a hat, but not in the hat I'm wearing. Haha. I would have a really reinforced hat. My hat would actually be a mimic. I would wear a mimic as a hat. Keep it tame, obviously. You don't want your head accidentally eaten. Though, in my experience, the best place to put a mimic is in a helmet or gauntlet, or any suit of armor, really, that you leave in the dungeon as treasure. Adventurers never check armor for traps. They never check to see whether the armor is secretly a monster. And so when they sense that, oh yes, this helmet's magical, they slot it over their head, and then suddenly the teeth emerge, and you've got a scene from The Thing. It's fantastic. So yes, I'd have a mimic on top of my head. I'd put the phylactery on your head, and no one would be any the wiser. Link says, did the crew say that Monster Kingdom is going to be crowdfunding the same time as the Curseborn Player's Guide? I know it was mentioned during the Onyx PathCon, but I can't remember now. No. We have very rarely, if at all, ran crowdfunding campaigns simultaneously or to overlap, because we don't want to split our audience and make them spend too much money all at once. So no, there will definitely be a gap between them. The Grey Ghost says, are you fond of the Ravenloft setting for D&D? How do you see Strad as a character in your campaigns? I like Ravenloft. I was playing through the 5th edition campaign very recently. Haven't finished it. I don't think we ever will. How do I see Strad? That comes entirely down to the person running it. I've never ran Ravenloft. I've never ran Strad. So you can play him as a tragic figure. You can play him as an evil megalomaniac. You can play him as anywhere in between, just as a monster with hit points and lots of special abilities. There's obviously lots of ways to play him. I am a big fan, not just because I like Vampire the Masquerade and Requiem and Curseborn, of a vampire as an antagonist. I think you've got a lot of room to play there. Strad is a good name, and it gives him as an antagonist room to think and room to socialize. It's one of those big failings of any game where the end boss is just an unthinking primordial kind of monster. It cuts out two means by which you might engage with them, intelligently or socially. So Strad, or any kind of thinking antagonist, is to me preferable like that. Not that, you know, most players would stick around and start asking him questions. I've seen far too many players, when they meet the big boss, they don't wait around for the killing speech at the end, as we all know. Link wants to know my most controversial opinion regarding Dungeons and Dragons. Other than the video I made about Gary Gygax or Elon Musk buying Dungeons and Dragons, that went far, didn't it? That then got live streamed and commentated on, like a riff tracks, by some far-right commentators. You can find that online somewhere. I can't say I've watched it, but I do know it's double the length of my video because they keep pausing it to talk about me, which is apparently very entertaining if you are entertained by the right-wing cretins. My favourite thing, my favourite hot take or controversial opinion regarding Dungeons & Dragons maintains, indeed, that alignment is a good thing. Granular, 9-point, grid-based alignment is a good thing. I think it's one of the strongest aspects of Dungeons & Dragons. and the simple law or chaos binary is far less interesting. Dove Sunseed Sword says, controversial? There we got that going on. I love the lore of AD&D, the mechanics of 3rd edition, Pathfinder 3.75 was the best, I agree. The phylactery is referring to the Tefillin. In all my years, we never referred to it as a phylactery. I do not know where the linguistic flop about happened. Blame Gary Gygax, typically. I mean, it's not always him. But one thing Gygax did when he assembled Dungeons & Dragons, he didn't have access to the internet back in the 1970s. And so, not that that's the only excuse, but I'm sure he wasn't intending for this game to be digested by all cultures across the world everywhere either. So when you first get into D&D, or the initial editions of Dungeons & Dragons, it is cross-cultural pollination all over the damn place. I mean, things are used without rhyme or reason. There's various cultural artifacts applied to monsters that shouldn't have them. It's whatever sounded cool at the time, and I completely get that. Despite my view that Gygax was an unapologetic misogynist, and I don't know, I can't recall any of his other stances, so I'll stick with that. I completely understand the desire, and have pursued this desire myself, of making a game fun at the expense of, I guess, appropriateness. The big challenge, especially today, is framing or pitching that game. Like, the reason I was able to get that to work, because they came from Beyond the Grave, came from Camp Murder Lake, and they came from Classified in particular, have got some very misogynist stuff in. They've got very sexually exploitative stuff in, from art to quotes to the archetypes you can play, and there's probably some racial stuff in there too. And that's not because I am a racist or a misogynist, it's because I am specifically trying to present a genre of cinema as it appeared at the time, but through a sort of parodic lens, if you like. So the most racist, misogynistic, bigoted characters in these games are figures of fun. You know, you are mocking them because they are stupid, but they still exist. And I think when you try and remove them from the game entirely, or any game entirely, you kind of defang it. You need bad guys, you need idiots. I don't think there's anyone really going around trying to remove all that stuff, but the big sort of punching bag for that I can pick on easily, because I've worked on it in different editions, is Werewolf the Apocalypse. Because, of course, everything up to and including 20th Anniversary Edition is very culturally heavy. Every tribe has a cultural basis, more or less. Not every one of them, but a lot of them do. And by 5th edition, they remove that lean from the game entirely, so that, well, I say entirely, but that I think this is where it breaks down. You've got some werewolf tribes that have had culture removed from them entirely, the Heart Wardens, formerly the Fianna, and you've got other tribes like the Gale Stalkers, formerly the Wendigo, who are still recognizable as a native or indigenous American tribe, but now almost stand out even more because there's so many other tribes that aren't culturally linked. So I think, you know, you can go too far, or not necessarily go too far. You can dilute what you're going for by trying to be too safe. It is all about finding the right way to contextualize your message and not treat your audience like idiots. Yes, one thing I always like to say is, don't aim for sensitivity, aim for maturity. You are writing for mature minds. Treat them like they're mature. If they don't understand it, ultimately that's their problem. But if you are trying to protect your readers' feelings constantly from beginning to end, and I'm all in favour of looking after people, but if you're trying to pander almost, I think your product, your novel, your game, your movie ends up getting a bit gutted as a result. So there's a very long answer to your question about phylacteries. Okay, and thank you very much, Dove Sunseed Sword, for the information there about phylacteries. I do appreciate that. Mr. wants to know how it's going. I'm doing well. Hi, Bubba Dumps. I love alignment. Good for you. So do I. Mark Wolf says, Spoony, that's Noah Antweiler. Whatever happened to him? Tells a really interesting story in a Counter Monkey episode about Strad convincing a Paladin PC to work for him. God, Spoony is well, that's an antique of vlogging. I don't think he does it anymore. I don't think he does much of anything, last I heard. Hopefully he's all right. But he was one of the originators back when I was starting on YouTube in 2009 or so. He was a bit heavily on Blip and on that guy with the glasses. That was it. It became Cinemassacre, I think. No, that's Angry Video Game Nerd. I don't know. There were lots of vloggers back then. It wasn't like I was ever in their league. But I remember Spoony. And yeah, I remember how he kind of disappeared up his own arse a little. Usually the big bad, says FMLH, has the upper hand, so trying diplomatic approach or stopping to monologue is just a waste of good turn. Yeah, fair. Games Workshop contributed a lot with the Fiend Folio. I'm always surprised by how much D&D they encoded. That's true. And the first ever Fiend Folio, of course, a lot of the real-world deities and things like that got stripped out of it for the Monster Manual, I believe it was. Hello, Lindsay Sweetwater. Have you taken the alignment quiz? If not, how do you see yourself as aligning? I see myself as I see the vast majority of humans rather naively as lawful good. Most of us obey the law, even if we don't necessarily worship it. And most of us, if we see someone hurt, will help them. We have empathy. And the thing is, alignment isn't an actual way of breaking someone down philosophically. But if you're to play that game, I think the vast majority of human beings are lawful good and neutral good, at least within their own society. I don't know who Lindsay Sweetwater is, but I'm bombarding this. But let's remove this person. Let's put them on a timeout for 24 hours. There we go. Excellent. Sam Average Man says, hello Matthew, have you played through any of the Artal Saurian games, Witcher or Cyberpunk Red? If any, do you have any thoughts on combat heavy mechanics? I like combat heavy mechanics, but I tend to prefer them at the physical tabletop rather than online. The thing is, when I'm at a physical tabletop, I can pretty much physically handhold a player to help them through it if they aren't as quick to pick options without rushing them. I can help them. Online, combat can really grind down while you're waiting for players to make choices. It never bothers me because I know everyone chooses things at a different rate. But I ran The Witcher online and found people struggled with it a little. I'm not a massive fan of the Artal Saurian system. I think now it feels a little antiquated. And there's a place for antiquated systems. You know, I think Slavery has a certain vintage quality, but I think it still works. It didn't work well for me. I don't know what that person carried on saying because I've hidden all their messages. I hope no one else can see them. Dove Sunseed Sword says, regarding racism and sexism, I remember when I first read on the Drow, it was so different from the usual way of things. Not saying it's good by today's standard, but what an inversion of sex and status. I completely agree. Thinking about it at the time, having wicked women as a evil matriarchy for your society was new. And isn't that staggering? Isn't it staggering that there was a time when we thought women being evil was new? No, the idea of it was presented as new. I'm sure it had come up plenty of times in fantasy, usually in the guise of Amazons, but the Drow were a very different take, especially when you started getting into the R.A. Salvatore, Drizzt, or Drizzt, I always prefer Drizzt, novels, where it was more fleshed out. I mean, I think an awful lot is owed to R.A. Salvatore in the way he presented Menzo Berenzan and other Drow cities. I completely agree. Games Wolf says, I think people need to stop calling medieval fantasy sexist. It's unhelpful and misses the point entirely that fantasy is historical in setting. No, I disagree with you there, Mark. I think, again, it depends on context, it depends on pitch. I think your fantasy games can include sexism without being sexist. And again, it depends on the framing. So a lot of the issues that come up, and this is a big topic maybe for a different video, come down to how women are presented in culture. And in a world, let's say, where everyone has access to magic and can potentially become a 9th level or cast 9th level spells or wield a greatsword with just as much efficiency and efficacy as a man, I don't know. I don't know how you would be able to necessarily justify having... No, you know what? I'm about to shoot myself in the foot. I was about to say I don't know how you could justify having just as much ready sexism. Thing is, Ed Greenwood, who is a lovely man with sex on his mind, it seems constantly, presents his Forgotten Realms as a pretty egalitarian state. There's almost as many, almost probably more, women rulers in the Forgotten Realms as there are men. And there are gay characters and straight characters and everything in between and beyond. And that's never presented as unusual. Now, obviously, the Dungeons & Dragons that gets published, the TSR Dungeons & Dragons, to start with, is a lot more straight-laced, straight-minded. And then come 4th and especially 5th edition, things start getting a little more fluid and acceptable. And I don't see a problem with that. It tends to mean that when you have a medieval fantasy, which is just our world but muddied up, so you have the same bigotry against gay people, same bigotry against women, same bigotry against black people. It's interesting because A Song of Ice and Fire is often brought into this kind of debate or discussion, because I don't recall of there being much racism in A Song of Ice and Fire, but there's definitely homophobia and sexism in A Song of Ice and Fire. And a lot of that is borne out from the history in it. I mean, it's on display, I think, in the current TV series, which I'm not watching, with the is that should be a king on the throne or should it be a queen on the throne? How much of what's holding her back is the fact that she's a woman? And how much of that is based on our Earth conception of a woman's role, rather than what a woman's role would be defined as in Westeros? It's something that he hasn't really dug into sufficiently, I feel, in his setting building to make it make a huge amount of sense in the same way as it does in, let's say, our Earth-based world, with the various cultures and religions we've got that have repeatedly enforced the women's role as secondary. So yeah, this is a big topic, probably bigger than an AMA. Mizo says, where are you in the UK? Do you ever run any games at cons or go to any cons? I'm from London. I'm in the south, closer to Salisbury and Southampton than London. But hi, Mizo. Lovely to meet another Britisher. If you ever want to play in any of my games, I will probably be at the UK Games Expo in Birmingham next year. I might be at Contingency, which is nearish King's Lynn. I may go to Tabletop Scotland in Edinburgh later this year. I might do if I'm available. So yeah, I do go to conventions, but it's a little more tricky for me now, because I used to go to conventions to run and play test games. That's where I got a lot of my play testing in, and back when I used to only play role-playing games once a week, I had so many RPGs that I wanted to try that I would go to cons and run them there. That was my chance to run games I never usually got a chance to roll out of the table. Now that I've got my Patreon and I'm on 11 separate groups a week, not a week, 11 separate groups a month, I no longer have that issue, and therefore I no longer have the need to run games at conventions. So I still like conventions sometimes, but I think I'm also a lot more comfortable with my antisocial personality. It's funny, you know, I've got a YouTube channel. I'm more than happy to shout and talk at you, but I have less and less of a desire to actually meet people or travel to meet people. Travel is just a burden I can do without. Mr. Mist says, as someone who's never played D&D, which edition would be a good choice to get? Pathfinder 2nd edition, Mr. Mister, but if you really want Dungeons & Dragons, go for 5th edition. It's very well supported, especially via the DM's Guild, and there is absolutely nothing stopping you from picking up 2nd edition and 3rd edition supplements if you want loads of good setting material for Planescape, Forgotten Realms, Dark Sun, and the rest, because you can easily just adapt the setting material to your 5th edition game. How do you feel about inventing your own gods in D&D, says Grave Bandit? For example, a badger called Bodger who likes mashed potatoes. Everybody knows Bodger likes mashed potatoes. No, he doesn't. It's not Bodger, it's Badger. But everybody knows Badger loves mashed potatoes. Bodger is the strange man who lives with him. Get it right, Grave Bandit. Figure it out. Natural Nuna says, good morning, good sir. Good morning to you. Good afternoon, in fact. If you like combat mechanics, what war games do you like? Have you played? I'm a big fan of Purple Haze. There we go. We'll go for Purple Haze. That's a fantastic Vietnam war game. You know, that's what I'll stick with, because I don't have much time left. Given Ed's involvement in the World Below, what were the biggest Forgotten Realms influences in the World Below? Good question. Probably have to ask Ed that. For me, I'm always a big fan of Fae, the Red Wizards of Fae, how they were prior to 5th edition. So back when there was a Zolkierate, I think it was, that might have been prior to 4th edition, in fact, where it wasn't just a massive undead kingdom, which I find a bit dull in the Forgotten Realms. And so there's a little bit of Fae in the World Below, in the Well Liches, despite the fact they're all undead. And there's a little bit of Fae in Monster Kingdoms with the Sorceress Kingdom. All right, let's see. What else do we have? Bob Street needs help, apparently. So I'll give you help. I'll give you some of the help you need. Here we go. Let's boot you out. There we go. What would you like to see or have adapted in the Netflix D&D TV series coming up, says the Grey Ghost? I don't know. And I guess I'd like to see a fresh story, a new story, and it's not adapting an existing adventure or novel. I prefer to see new things. But more importantly than that, it is that I'm not a huge fan of fantasy on TV and in movies. Honor Among Thieves was entertaining, but it doesn't grab me quite as much as other genres. So, I don't know, I would like to be surprised. That's the thing. I would like to see something that I've not seen before. How about that? That's nicely ambiguous. All right, then. So, I'm going to call it there because I've got a game to get to. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. I really appreciate it, as ever. And I will speak to you again soon. Maybe tomorrow we're going to do some more South Korean dating games, because if you missed it, we played Mia and the Dragon Princess yesterday on my YouTube channel, another FMV game, and it got copyright struck 9 times after it went up. So if you didn't watch it live, you won't get to see it, because that video has been well and truly blocked from my channel. It was a fun game. It had some very good writing, good one-liners, and one of the best written Wales Interactive FMV games. But yeah, not on my YouTube channel anymore. I think we're safer with South Korean dating. So I've got a new South Korean dating game, actually sent to me by the developer. Someone watched me do 5 hearts under one roof and has actually given me a code for a new South Korean dating game. So that is what we will try out tomorrow. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.